So, when we think about pandemics, our minds immediately go to science, right? To medicine. But what if the ultimate shield against a virus isn't something you find in a lab, but something you find deep inside yourself? Today, we're digging into a really fascinating spiritual lecture that completely flips our whole understanding of illness on its head.
And that's the big question the source material we're looking at today really puts front and center. In a world that's so focused on finding external fixes, this perspective challenges us, big time, to start looking inward for our real protection.
The lecture we're digging into wasn't just some abstract philosophical talk. It was actually a direct response to the very real fear surrounding the Nipah virus, a scary disease with no known treatment. This urgent medical crisis was the exact trigger that led the speaker to offer this pretty radical spiritual view on what's going on.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the threat itself. Then, we'll get into the source's pretty wild claim about what it's all for. After that, we'll explore the spiritual protection it proposes, take a new look at death, and finally, see what the predictions are for what's coming next. Okay, first up, let's talk about the threat. Why does the source say this new wave of illness is so fundamentally different from anything we've ever dealt with before? Well, according to this source, we're making a huge mistake if we think of these new viruses as just another medical problem to solve. The speaker argues that they're actually a signal, a kind of wake-up call to change our whole perspective, to stop seeing it as a battle we have to fight, and start seeing it as an opportunity we need to understand. All right, so if these viruses aren't just a random fluke of nature, then what are they? This leads us to what is probably the most controversial claim in the entire source, their true purpose. Yeah, the source doesn't pull any punches here. The argument is that these untreatable viruses are no accident. They are, in fact, a deliberate tool that nature itself is using to organize, or maybe even clean up, the human population. But who exactly is nature targeting? And this is really the critical piece of the puzzle. According to this view, how vulnerable you are has very little to do with your physical health and everything to do with your spiritual state. The people who are most at risk? It's those who've lost their way, their purpose, the ones who are just kind of waiting for time to run out without a real reason for being here. Okay, so if the threat is spiritual, then it kind of makes sense that the solution has to be spiritual too, right? This is where the source introduces this really interesting idea it calls quantum energy, which it claims is the ultimate kind of immunity. So what exactly is this quantum energy? The speaker is really clear that this is not some physical thing we can measure in a science lab. It's better to think of it as your inner light, the vitality of your soul. It's that spiritual charge you get when you have a clear purpose and a good reason to get out of bed in the morning. And this chart really lays it out perfectly. A person who is full of this quantum energy, someone who is engaged, living with purpose, is said to be spiritually strong. And that strength creates a kind of shield that can literally deflect a material virus. On the flip side, someone with weak energy is left spiritually and therefore physically wide open. This quote gets right to the heart of the theory. There's a hierarchy of energy here. The non-material energy of your soul is just superior to and can overpower the material energy of a virus. So real immunity, in this view, is a spiritual state, not just a biological one. Now, this spiritual way of thinking, it doesn't just change how we look at living. It totally flips the script on what it means to die. Okay, this is a really radical idea. The source is suggesting that dying from a virus isn't some medical failure or a tragedy we have to fight against. Instead, it's presented as a natural, almost graceful exit for souls whose purpose here on Earth is done. The source even lays out what it calls an art of departing. The most important final step is to let go without jipchok. That's a Korean word for a really deep, lingering attachment that keeps you tied to this world. The idea is that dying with heavy regrets or desires can actually cause the soul to become a guishin, a wandering, restless spirit that just can't move on. So where is this all headed? Well, the source makes some pretty bold predictions about the future of pandemics and what we should be doing to get ready. The prediction is, well, it's pretty stark and specific. 2 more major viral waves are coming. And the key thing here is that they won't be like anything we've seen before. The source claims these future viruses will be intentionally designed by nature to be completely beyond our medical control. The whole point, from this perspective, is to give us a challenge that we are not meant to solve with our technology. And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway from this whole lecture.
The core message isn't to be scared of what's coming, but to focus on how you live your life. According to this view, the best protection you can possibly have isn't found in a lab, but in a life that's filled with purpose, with integrity, and with doing the right thing. And so this is the final, powerful question the source leaves us with. It tries to shift the entire conversation away from things like public health policy and vaccine research, and instead it puts the responsibility for immunity right on the individual's inner world. Now, whether you agree with it or not, it's a totally different way of looking at a pandemic.